Well, grace to you and peace from God our Father and our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. It is no mistake that the season of Advent comes when it does. Time in which the days get shorter, the nights longer, the air crisper and cooler, and our dependence upon light more pronounced. Which leads me to say, the sun. The sun. The sun, as you know, is so critical for our lives that if there was no sun in the sky, there would be no life. The sun is the single greatest source that we have for light and heat and vitality. Many of you know that the sun is roughly 109 times larger than the earth. The mass of the sun is 99.8% of the total mass of our universe, the entire universe. It's made up largely of hydrogen and helium, and these atoms are slamming against one another so rapidly that they produce incredible energy and heat. It said the surface of the sun is roughly 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And the sun, we're told, is 4 billion years old, and it has 5 more billion years of life in it. People, well, more than Californians, people have worshipped the sun over the years. Ancient civilizations, like the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Aztecs, so many others, recognized how important the sun was for life. And in a day and an age in which we were not able to control light, we had no access to electricity and to be able to capture it, and we did not have the ability to well govern the fire that was created, the sun was the single source of how civilizations were able to thrive. And so these ancient civilizations believed surely God is in the sun. Surely God is a part of what the sun is doing. Now many civilizations believe this, but not the early Israelites. You see, when the Israelites told their story of creation, they suggested that it all started in darkness and it was the Spirit of God that hovered over the waters. And then on the first day, light was created, but not the sun. The sun was not created until the 4th day of creation. The Israelites were making a very clear statement that the sun in the sky is not the light that will bring them comfort. It is Yahweh. It is God who called them into being, who made them a special people, a people to be blessed, so that the whole world would be blessed. And there came a time in which the Israelites needed light. They were wandering quickly away from the Egyptians, a people who worshiped the sun. And they were in fear of their life, and they were going through passages of which they did not know the direction, nor did they know the steps that they needed to take. And traveling during the day was not a problem, but traveling at night most certainly was. Have you ever traveled at night when it's pitch dark outside and you can't see a thing and you don't know where your next step needs to go? Have you experienced that? Whether from the bedroom to the kitchen or from the campsite to the bathroom, traveling in the dark can be a frightening thing. And so to give them guidance, God provided a pillar of fire for the Israelites to follow so that they might know where to place their steps, that they might know where they might be going next, and that they might be comforted all the way to the promised land. So now, years later, for 1 week period of time, the Israelites commemorated this moment, this time in their history when God was a source of light for them to wander through the wilderness, And they called this festival the Feast of Booths. Booths as in tents. Tents as a way to remember that they traveled and lived in these tents for so many years, 40 years, as they traveled through the desert. And now every year when they have this festival, the Israelites would camp together. They would take their tents and they would place them all through the city of Jerusalem, just as their ancestors did years ago, to commemorate this moment when God provided light that they might survive and be comforted. And this was a party, and this was a time of worship. Why can't we Christians marry those two words better together, partying and worshiping? That's what the Israelites were doing. And so every night, all night long, 16 huge torches were lit in the courtyard of the temple. And these torches filled the whole city with light. And there was dancing, and there was joyfulness, and there was celebration. All because of what God provided years before. And then, on the last night of the celebration, this was the biggest night. The night of light, they called it. When the party went later into the evening, and the celebration and the worship took great root. Then the next day, two priests would walk eastward as the sun was rising over the Mount of Olives to the east. These two priests would walk eastward to the gate of the temple, and then they'd turn around and they would blow a ram's horn, and they would proclaim and praise the deeds of God, who was for them a light that led them through the darkness and provided great comfort. Did you catch that? They turned their back to the sun. This was done on purpose. They faced the temple. They declared in word and in action that it is God, not the Son, who is their Savior, who is their Comforter. Should the sun stop burning in the sky, they would not be deterred, for they were comforted knowing that God would take care of them into eternity. And so it's at this moment, this precise moment in the celebration of the Festival of Booths, that Jesus takes command of the event and declares, I am the light of the world. Those who follow me will never walk in darkness. Do you see what Jesus has done here? Do you understand why this is such a pivotal moment in the way that John, the gospel writer, is telling the story of Jesus? Do you get why the people, that the religious experts, the Pharisees, were offended at what Jesus was saying? It's not just that Jesus was saying that the sun in the sky is not our God. He is putting a face to God and saying to those who have, who are, or who will walk in darkness, I am the light. I am God. Sometimes when we read the Bible, it's really important to get to the background and to lay the foundation to hear how radical, how significant this God of ours is and what God is up to. And to hear in this moment the radical words of Jesus. And to somehow hear these words as radical for us today. Now granted, we are not as naive as those early civilizations. Fortunately, we've learned how to harness fire. We've learned how to capture electricity. Fortunately, the night is no longer something we need fear. And what takes place in the night is not a mystery for us. We own the light. But this not ought to deceive us into thinking that it doesn't get dark. Oh, it gets dark. It may not get visibly or physically dark necessarily in our lives today, but most certainly emotionally and spiritually it does. For the person faced with terminal cancer, it gets dark. For the family unsure of where their next meal will come from, it gets dark. For the couple who have been at war and whose marriage is on the brink, it gets dark. For people who fear fires encroaching upon all that they own, it gets dark. For the person whose job is in limbo and whose much needed health care is in question, it gets dark. For the one who is depressed and feels incessantly alone without anybody knowing what they're struggling with, it gets dark. For the teenager who does not like the way she looks and is not welcome to hang out with those that she would like to look like, it gets dark. For the person whose spouse has passed away and spends many nights alone in front of a television, it gets dark. Darkness comes in many forms. And darkness isn't only individual. Darkness can also be communal. I mean, tell me, how much light can there be in countries where there is civil unrest and where personal rights are stomped down and where vast and powerful dictators determine the future for mass numbers of people? How much light can there be? How much light can there be when warring countries threaten one another with nuclear annihilation? How much light can there be when terrorist bombs rip apart bodies and where humans are trafficked and sold and bought like commodities? If you've come to church this morning to escape the harsh realities of a dark world, I'm sorry to have wrecked it for you. But living Pollyanishly is not why Jesus came into the world. Jesus came to be light to those who are in darkness. Some years ago, I and a Boy Scout leader took about 12 Boy Scouts with us to hike up in Yosemite. We got a late start on the day, and so as we were making our way, which was going to be a couple of miles to the camp, our scout leader started to fatigue and slow down, as did a lot of the younger scouts. So it was decided that I would go on ahead with the older scouts, and we would get to the camp and set it up and begin making dinner, which we did. So we arrived, we set up camp, we made a fire, we started dinner, and a short time later, some of the young scouts showed up, but there was no scout leader. The scouts told us that the scout leader had gotten slower and slower and finally said for them to go on ahead, that he would go on by himself. So I did what you should never do in these situations. I went looking for him all by myself. And it was dark, really dark. And I was unaware at the moment, but became aware later in the trip that there are bears in those woods. But I wasn't scared, and I'll tell you why. I had a flashlight. A simple flashlight powered by 2 D-cell batteries can be enough to embolden an idiot like me to wander alone in the woods. But for those who face greater dangers and deeper darknesses, there is something even more powerful than the words of Jesus. There is Jesus himself. Now I know what I just said sounds silly. It sounds outlandish. It's illogical, isn't it? That a first-century Jewish rabbi would be comfort for us today, 2,000 years later. For the unbelieving, this is a huge hurdle to overcome. But for the believing, for those who have experienced that very presence of Christ, for those who know that the light of Christ is the comfort that they need in the moments that are greatest, there's no convincing that needs to be made. I get together with a couple of friends every month and we just chat. A couple of these friends are pastors of local congregations here in town. A couple are therapists. And you know what we talk about? We talk about you. Not you by name, but you by general circumstance. We talk about people who are facing difficulties and struggles and tragedies of one kind or another, and we are constantly amazed at how you overcome the challenges that you face. In any given week, I know that there are many stories being told within our congregation of personal tragedy, of struggle, of pain, of concern, of wonder, broken relationships, issues that are deep and dividing and concerning. I know that they're out there, but I don't know the details behind of those stories. I'm sure this morning, if you were bold enough, we would hand out the microphone and each would be able to tell a story where in your life, tragedy has hit you the deepest. It seems to be a common theme. But here's the liturgical response that I have learned from this congregation that I boast about to my friends that I gather with. Folks in this church generally say the same thing to me over and over as they relate to me the tragedies and the challenges of their lives. They say this: well, Pastor, I know there are people who are dealing with a whole lot worse than I am. Believe it or not, I had somebody who was in the hospital in his final days, dying of cancer, say to me, well, Pastor, I know that there are people who are a lot worse off than I am. And in the moment I thought to myself, oh, I don't know if that's true. But when I took a step back and saw the big picture of what he was saying, he was absolutely right on target. There are people in so many situations in this world, whether describing economic realities, political struggles, or just simply the fact that they don't have this relationship with God, who are in much worse condition than even those who are dying. But here's the thing. We have learned. Somehow we've learned, whether through sudden awareness or gradual experiences, that Jesus is the light of the world, and Jesus alone is the light to carry us through our darknesses. We hear him say to us, somehow, you are not alone. I am with you. That doesn't mean that the darkness goes away, because it doesn't. It just means that, well, like my simple flashlight in the woods, the presence of Christ in our lives is enough to lead us through these dark moments. But you know well enough that just having Jesus with you, it's not the whole story, is it? The point is that Jesus wishes to be your light so that he could be your guide, so that you would follow him. Remember, Jesus isn't just your companion, he is your Lord. And the Lord is somebody who shows you, teaches you, and tells you how to live and where to go. Those who follow me will not walk in darkness. Which means that we don't always get to pick the path that we go or choose direction in our life. Sometimes, yes, sometimes we find respite in the midst of chaos, but sometimes we are led to walk through the valley of the shadow of death. You don't get to tell Jesus where to go. You follow. But you need to stay close to Jesus. You need to stay in places where you can hear him, experience him, know him, imagine him, and learn from him. Well, the Bible is a good place to begin, isn't it? So is being here in worship. So is being a part of a small group with other Christians. So is going to a retreat center just to get away from it all. And so is reading devotional books to hear about how God has been impacting the lives of other people. All of this is to suggest to follow Jesus is to place yourself in positions where Jesus can get to you, and then to pay attention. So I'm out in Yosemite, someplace above the valley, and I'm alone, and it's dark, but I'm okay, because I have my flashlight. And finally I find the scout leader, and he's fatigued. His feet are really blistered. and he doesn't have a flashlight, which is breaking a major rule with Boy Scouts, right? So I take his pack and I put it on my back and I lead the way with my flashlight. We come to a brook. It's more of a big creek, and it has no bridge, and so we have to cross the creek by walking on boulders. So I go first, and I light down, and I showing the light on the boulder that I need to step on, and I get across. And then I shine the light for the boulders for the scout leader to wander across as well. And he makes it. And we make it. I am the light of the world, Jesus said. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness. How is it that you're listening to Jesus? How is it that Jesus is shining a light for you to be able to show the steps that you need to take as you wander through life? I believe that this is a great gift that we receive at Christmas time, that whatever darkness we wander into, we are never so far away from the light of Christ that we are in danger of getting lost. May the Son of God, not the sun in the sky, but may the Son of God be your light in your life forever. Amen. The peace of the Lord be with you always. Thank you. I invite you to share the peace of Christ with those who are near you.